headlines now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has reacted to the passing of Iranian's president, saying he's deeply saddened by the disaster that claimed the life of Ebrahim Raisi and the foreign minister of the country, Hossein Amir-Abdollahian, and their personnel. The charred wreckage of the helicopter, which crashed yesterday carrying Raisi and the foreign minister, was found earlier today after an overnight search in blizzard conditions. State TV in Iran is reporting that images from the site show the aircraft slammed into a mountainous peak, although there's no official word on the cause of the crash. Let's make sense of this moment. Bring in the head of African Governance and Diplomacy Program with the South African Institute of International Relations. That's Stephen Gruzd, who joins us now via our video link. Stephen, great to see you, albeit under these circumstances. Thanks very much indeed for making time. No matter how you feel about the geopolitics in the Middle East, what's taken place in Iran is incredibly devastating, especially when you consider, dare I say, the amount of prominent leaders that Iran has lost, let's say, in just the past 5 years.
Yes, it's indeed a tragedy, unexpected and very unfortunate. It is going to have big implications, I think, for the country and for the region. And any loss of life is to be, is to be regretted.
Obvious questions about what might have happened here. My understanding is that, Ebrahim Raisi was traveling in a convoy of 3 aircraft. I haven't heard about the fate of the other 2, but if everybody else was fine, obvious questions are going to come up about whether or not there's any foul play here.
Well, it was very bad weather, I believe. I mean, I'm based like you here in South Africa, so I'm also relying on news reports. But indeed, that there was a convoy of 3 aircraft, and 2 of them then lost touch with Raisi's helicopter, and it slammed into a peak. That's what we have heard in very bad weather. I mean, yeah, I think these things will create speculation, but in the end, it's going to be what is provable. And that's certainly, at the face of it, it looks like just a terrible accident.
Sure. We know Raisi has been in power for about 3 years. He's been touted as somebody who represented a much more conservative, hardline sect of Iranians in the country. But is also somebody who's been described as actually enjoying a fair amount of support in Iran, which I suppose means that the people in that country are likely to be fairly devastated by what's taken place.
Well, I think there's been mixed reactions. When it was suspected that he had been killed, some Iranians set off fireworks, which is a way of celebrating. Others, I think, indeed will be very heartsore and very sad by this. But, he also ruled Iran with an iron fist. So I think many in the population may be harboring hope for some kind of change in the regime, perhaps that it becomes less dogmatic and less harsh in the way that it treats civil society.
Interesting you say that, because at this very early stage, there are already discussions around succession. My understanding is that Raisi was meant to succeed the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And now that he's no longer in the picture, for lack of a better term, do we know what happens insofar as that is concerned?
Well, there's 2 levels. One is what happens with the Iranian government, of which Raisi was the head. So the deputy prime minister or deputy president steps in, and there's meant to be an election within 50 days. But Iranian elections have not really been free and fair. They're very much controlled by the Supreme Council, by as to who can stand and how the choice works. But yes, indeed, Raisi had been touted as possibly taking over from Khamenei. So that will leave basically 2 vacuums. Who's going to succeed Khamenei, who's getting on in years, and who will succeed Raisi in the sort of administrative role of president.
This is, of course, coming at a time where there is a fair amount of instability in the region, not least because of the situation in Gaza. We know that there's no love lost, so to speak, between the US and Iran because of their affiliation in this war. What impact do you reckon this will have, if anything at all? I mean, is it just adding to the mix of instability, or are you starting to connect the dots, so to speak?
I think that it will create a period of instability. I think the US and its allies in Europe and the Middle East will be watching very, very carefully what happens in Tehran in the next weeks and possibly months. Iran launched an all-out attack against Israel a couple of weeks ago, but many had said that it was very restrained and it signaled in advance of what it was going to do. Israel retaliated also in a measured way. So it's interesting to see, it will be interesting to see what the effect is of this change of leadership in Iran, including on its proxies like Hamas, like Hezbollah in the region, which were very much armed and supported by Iran, but not controlled by Iran. So there is going to be a period of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Is a more hardliner going to come in, or will it be somebody who's a bit more moderate?
Yeah, because we live in an increasingly globalized society, people around the world, I imagine, asking themselves what impact this might have on them, including South Africans. The president has released a statement as expected, saying he's deeply saddened by what's taken place. He's outlined the history between Iran and South Africa, saying that he has been on a working visit in 2015. Do you reckon that this is something that is likely to impact South Africa outside of these bilateral relations that Pretoria had with Tehran?
Well, perhaps, Iran joined the BRICS at the beginning of the year. It was at the Joburg summit when it was invited along with other countries. So I think relations are deepening with Iran. Might we see something strange happen with the petrol price? Is there going to be an oil crisis given that Iran is an oil exporter? There were many sanctions on Iran. So I think the effects on South Africa would probably be more indirect. But this was a country that South Africa was quite close to. It had defended Iran's right to develop peaceful nuclear power in the United Nations and in the International Atomic Energy Agency. So the relations between Iran and South Africa were quite cordial and quite strong. Excuse me.
Sure. Yeah, and I suppose, the next question that comes up is whether or not whoever succeeds Raisi may have a different posture towards South Africa, right? So, again, he's been described, Raisi, as much more of a conservative hardliner. If, in fact, the person who takes up from him doesn't continue in that line, one has to wonder the impact it might have on foreign policy and, by extension, the relationship it has with South Africa.
Yes, sure. And I think the personality and the makeup of the leader is always important, but my sense is that South Africa's ties with Iran would outlive any particular person. They have been strong since democracy over the last 30 years and have been increasing. So I don't think there would be too much of a disruption, even if it's somebody who is slightly more moderate or even slightly more conservative.
All right, Stephen Gruzd, always great getting your take on these issues. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to the SABC. Stephen is with the South African Institute of International Affairs. Once again, thanks very much indeed.